So hello again everyone and welcome back to the TIPROS FMS webinar. This will be our fourth entry in the series and discusses the RGV and our OP supporter. We're going to be logging back into our in-house FMS to demonstrate some of those features for you. So this is what we're going to be looking at when we go through this today. We're going to show you some operations at our load station and demonstrate how we can control the RGV. We'll then transition back to our cell controller and show you how some of these operations take place from there. Next, we'll look at our tool management options, which includes OP supporter. We will then be we'll cover each of these topics in depth, so if you do have questions, we ask that you hold these until the end. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Tim Campbell and I'll serve as your presenter and administrator for today's episode. Joining me as always is Keith Jackson, who serves as our technical expert. Okay. So we have three key goals for today's episode. Understanding how to operate the RGV in an efficient manner, which can be done from the cell controller as well as the load station. Next, we'll take a look at tool management, which most of you had said that you're interested in learning more about in our last episode. This mostly entails working with OP supporter, which has different levels to it, just like our software. And then finally, we'll look at RGV maintenance and show you how to keep your cell in good working order. So when we talk about RGV operation, this is what we'll be covering. So some of these actions are taken at the load station, while others can be done at the cell controller. We'll go through our load station operations first, and then move to the controller. But first, we need to make sure we've powered up the cell, so we'll really briefly show you how to do the two methods of doing so. So like I said, there are two different ways to power up the cell, manually and automatically. First, we'll walk you through the procedure to boot up manually. You'll find the main power switch on your specific machine. So for the smaller J machines, this will be at the back. And then if you have a 630 or larger, you'll find it on the side. You turn the switch to on and then press on the power button. Next, you walk around to the CNC screen and press the NC on button to boot up your system. Once this is complete, you'll start the hydraulics by pushing the pump on and waiting for that to boot up. Finally, you'll want to home the machine and put it in auto cycle. And then we can start up our cell controller, which we start like any other computer, and then log into the cell and power up the RGV by turning on the main power switch on the electrical cabinet. So now we're connected and the cell is talking to our controller, and the last thing we want to do is place the RGV in auto cycle. Now a much simpler way to do this is to power up the cell centrally. You'll just need to make sure that the centralized control key is turned to on in each machine. But in order to start the machine in centralized control, you'll need to have shut the machine down in centralized control. So again, you start by booting up the cell controller, and then you'll log in, and then you'll switch on the main switch on the cell and wait for the load station operating screen to fully boot up. Next, you'll press the power on button and wait for the NC in the machine to fully start, and then press ready to start the main hydraulics. When you do this, the ready lamp on the load station should activate as well. Then we'll press the zero return button and wait for auto return on the program to execute. And if you do have a warm-up program on your machines, you can press warming up here to execute that as well. Finally, we'll put everything in auto cycle by pressing auto cycle and verify that it is on the machine as well as the load station operator panel. Now that we have everything up and running, we can take a look at operating our RGV.
One point here, Tim, is our centralized control key is used to start and stop the whole system as a unit. So you don't need it to run in auto cycle, but to start and stop it, this key must be on.
Okay. So we're going to look at our load station now. And as we had discussed earlier in webinar 1, each cell has at least one load station with a controller that looks like the image on the left. The right display there is what appears on the on-screen control. The RGV can be controlled directly using these functions here, and we're going to demonstrate some of those for you now. So 1 second while I load this up. Okay. So what you should be seeing now is our load station. And what we want to do is take the RGV out of manual or out of auto cycle, and do this by flipping the manual toggle to manual and the central control toggle off. So you see that here, and you notice that once that does happen, the screen will change. Next, we'll be demonstrating a to and from command. So to do this, you'll press the X-axis button and then the to and from button at the same time to pull up this screen here. Next, what you'll do is enter in the station you'd like to bring a pallet from and the station you'd like to send it to. In our case, we're going to send it from station 201 to station 1. You'll enter in the values, so again 1 and 2, verify the information is correct, and then the RGV does the rest. So we'll press the start button. It should start here momentarily. We've got the start button. And then you see the lights flash, and that indicates the RGV is in motion. Okay. So we've got another example where you can transfer a pallet from one station on the rack to another. So since we had taken the pallet from 201 and brought it to the load station, we'll take it from 202 and move it to 201. So again, same process as before. You're entering your values for to and from, and then press start. And the next thing we wanted to show you is how to read and write a chip to a pallet. Now to do this, the pallet must be on the RGV. So we'll go through the same process as before to pull up our to and from command, and then we'll press the ID button. So again, the axis and then to and from shown here, and then the ID button in the center. Okay, so the first thing we can do when this happens is read the pallet on the RGV to ensure the data in our cell controller is correct. So you press the load button, or the right, at the pallet, and the pallet number will appear under old data. If you wanted to write a new pallet number, you press the right and enter in the necessary information. But please keep in mind, you can only have one example of a pallet in the system. So only one pallet 1, pallet 2, and so on. Another useful feature that we're going to show you is moving the vehicle manually around the cell. And again, we need to make sure that we're in manual mode, and you'll press the jog button on the load screen and then toggle the feed rate to rapid. You can then select the axis you want to move, in this case X, and then press the plus or minus button to move the vehicle around the cell. Okay, so since we can move the RGV and lose its exact position, it can be helpful to quickly home the vehicle in a particular axis. Now to do this, you'll press the axis in question and press the homing button. You're then able to hit the plus or minus to move the RGV back to its home position. So we're going to go through that here in X, Y, and Z.
Okay, all these functions that Tim just explained to us is how we move our system around manually. And a lot of times this is for our maintenance people, for they could get in the RGV and do some maintenance, like inspect the rails, look at load stations, and even clean the pallet changer off from the machine. So all these moves are done that way. So now Tim is going to explain how we get into the door to do this.
So as Keith was saying just now, we typically move the RGV manually when we want to do maintenance on the cell. So you need to unlock it to get in to do your cleaning or whatever type of maintenance you need. So this is really simple to do. Just make sure again that the RGV is in manual mode, and then you go to one of the side doors. You turn the key at the door to manual mode and then press the door unlock button. Once this stops flashing, you can unlock the door, remove the key, and then walk inside just to make sure that you don't get locked in.
Right. And then, quite naturally, once we do all our maintenance in RGB. We need to get out of it. So how we do it is just a reverse procedure. Come out, close the door, lock it, push the button. The green light should go off and we put it back in auto cycle. But when we do this, there's another feature I want to show you. So Tim is going to pull up our cell controller screen now. Okay, and what he's going to do is do a right mouse click on our vehicle, and then we're going to go to transfer data, and then we're going to PMC maintenance. This screen here is what the cell is doing on RGB. So the first thing we want to look at is how to get it back up quickly. So if we hit the escape key, you'll notice that we see the reset. Hit that one more time. So there's a reset key. Now another thing we need to do too is when somebody from Toyota, we have a problem with it, we can look at our message. So let's hit the message here. And we got alarms, message, and history. So if we had alarm on the RGB, okay, that will appear here. If we had a message and click the message button, this would tell us if the doors are open or if we need to change the battery, this will appear here. And then the history is a history of all the alarms that the vehicle has encountered.
Okay, and I've forgotten to mention, Keith, when we're homing the vehicle, which axis do we always want to start with first?
Yes, when we home the vehicle, we always want to do the Z-axis, and then we want to move our X and Y.
Okay. All right, so now that we've pulled up our cell controller screen here, we'll show you some other ways that we can also move the RGB. Okay, but first we did want to caution everyone and let you know that you need to verify your information in the cell controllers updating when you move the vehicle around the cell. So for example, when we move a pallet from the rack to the RGV, that's not updated in our cell controller and the system still thinks that that pallet's on the rack. To make this change, we need to drag the pallet to the appropriate station. So in our video there, we had demonstrated moving a pallet from one station on the rack to another. So we're going to move pallet 10 here, which is on station 103, and then send that to 201. So again, real simple, just drag and drop. We get our manual transfer screen, and since we had executed this move earlier physically in the cell using a to and from command, we just need to update the data to ensure that everything is correct within our cell. So we click Move Data, hit OK, and our pallet has moved. Okay.
Information.
So another way we can do this is actually to drag and drop. So we're going to drag pallet number 1 here from the RGV to our load station. Again, we get our manual transfer window, and if we select manual transfer, we don't have to do a to and from command. We can actually drag and drop, and the RGV completes the rest.
Okay, here's real important that we make sure all our data is in the right spot. So this is one way we could do it. Another thing we need to look at is if you notice that our stations at the top are red. Okay, Tim?
Right.
Okay, so what we did here is we permit pallets to get delivered there. In this case is, why we do this is because if we want to take a pallet out the system and do some maintenance on it, or even just mount fixtures to it, drill holes in it, this is what we do. We do a drag and drop, bring it in, we can physically take it off, and then we move our data back to the station. And then we prohibited that for going in. So if we do a right mouse click on that station, station data, and we have another menu. Tim is going to explain this quick to you.
So again, as always, we want to hit input. You notice that the RGV has stopped. Right? We can only do this when we're in manual mode. Right? What we look at is this transfer prohibition here. We've got 3 options. The X is the red status that Keith was talking about. That doesn't allow us to transfer any pallets to that station. Okay, we can change it to allow and hit save and close. And you notice it's the same gray shade that the rest of the stations are in. All right, and just to demonstrate the other option we have auto mode, which is a yellow. And of course, that'll mean we can't do any manual transfers to that station, but when the RGV is in auto mode, it will deposit and pick up pallets from that station. Okay, so we'll change that back to red as we had it.
Now, Tim, let's click on pallet number 10. Notice that's a different shade.
Right, so that was the palette that we had moved earlier,
Right.
and before it was this purple no machine color, and now we've got it as gray and no setting.
Yes.
So what we need to do is update this palette.
Right. So we're going to change the status of that palette. So let's do a right mouse click on that palette, and then we're going to go to current palette data. So granted, it should be in manual when we do this, but now if you hit the input key, it's going to say our RGB is stopping. So kind of explain what we need to go through here.
So this is important because if the palette is in a no setting status, the RGB will not pick up that palette while we're in auto mode. So we need to change that, and how we do that is go to this drop down and select no machine. We need to verify that the process is going to the load station and there's no alarms on that palette. Okay, we can then save and go back out. We notice that the color of the palette has now changed, so the status is correct. And then once we do turn everything back in auto cycle, the RGB can go pick up that palette so we can load more work into the cell.
Like Tim said, it's got to be in auto cycle. We do want to run the system in auto cycle. So all those palettes either's got to be no machine or done in machine or normal to keep the RGB in auto cycle mode. Okay?
Okay. And then really quickly, Keith, it's very simple to put the RGB back in auto cycle, correct? How do we do that?
Well, how we put the RGB back in auto cycle is you go to the main monitor over there on the cell controller and just flip the thumb switches back into auto mode and hit the auto mode button. So,
and then we're ready to go. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So that covers our information we have on the RGB. All right. We also talked about how to get into the cell to do any maintenance that you need and that sort of thing. But now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about our OP supporter and tool management. But first, we did want to ask you a few questions to get a better idea of what you do know, what you're comfortable with. So I'm going to launch a poll for you now. And we're curious about a function in our OP supporter called adaptive control. So the first question is, do you have the optional adaptive control on your cell? And you should be seeing that poll question now. Go ahead and indicate yes or no. All right, so looking at our poll here, it's just about 70-30, so 70% of you guys say that you do not have adaptive control, and with about 30 saying yes. So for this next question, this is more geared towards those who do have it. So if you do have it, adaptive control, do you understand how to use it? So options again, yes, no, and if you don't have it, go ahead and hit I don't have it. Okay, so looking at our poll information here, we're just pulling up now, it seems like only a few of you actually understand what we're talking about with our adaptive control. So we're going to go through that and talk about the different options that are in OP Supporter and possibly show you some new things. And those of you who do not have it, and again, it's just a learning opportunity to learn more about the options we have at Toyota. So what we'll do is actually log into our NC controller. We can do that from the cell controller here. All you have to do is double click on the CNC icon here, and we've got our CNC. Keith's going to go through this and talk about OP Supporter.
Okay, once we log in, let's go into custom one, which we can access it here at the machine.
And custom one's a hard button on the machine, right?
Yes, it is. Okay, so we come up with this menu. We're only going to talk about two things, tools and manual transfer. So Tim, hit tool for me. So we come up to another screen, and the first thing we want to do is look at data. So the data give us a quick snapshot of 15 tools in pockets. So I'm going to go through and kind of explain this real quick. So pocket number 1 is just a pocket. That's a number we can't change. Moving over to where it says enter at, there's an asterisk by pocket number 1. That means there is a tool that resides in that pocket now. So we come over to a tool number or tool name. That's the name we give it up to eight digits. And now we describe the length of the tool. So we go to our next one. That's the length of this particular tool. Go to radius. That's going to be our D offset, our cutter compensation. Then we come to our life remaining. If we had any life on that particular tool, that will show up here. Status is if it's broken, life is over, adaptive control alarm, if that tool has been triggered that way. And then we got another one here called first tool. This is mostly used for like born bars. If I set a born bar, before I leave, I could flag this as being the first tool. So I don't have to stand by the machine. Once it gets to that tool, it'll throw up an alarm and tell me to come and look at the tool. So it'll be an operator call here. So let's go back and let's search for a tool. So let's go to pocket 190, Tim.
So we can quickly do a search by going back to our pocket number and then entering 190 in on the keypad, and then we'll go down and click search, and we can do a jump to pocket 190.
Okay, and then from here we want more details of that tool that's in pocket 190. So hit detail. So detail got some of the same information in it. Things change a little bit. Still got the pocket number. We scroll over to where it says T. T is, if that is highlighted, that means there is a tool in that pocket. Just so happen we don't have a tool in this particular pocket. Come over, and we got the tool name that we had, and then the next one is the serial number. The serial number has to be in there for the cell controller to the update to the machine. So we only can have one serial number of that type in our whole system.
So that serial number has to be unique to each individual tool, right?
True.
Okay.
Okay. Now let's go down. We got offset. You notice in brackets is an inch. If I programmed an inch, my tool information has to be an inch. Okay. Now we got geometry or tool H numbers. We have 3 different H numbers we could use for this tool. Scroll over to D, and we get the same thing, 3 for our D compensation. So each tool can have 3. Well, step down, and we get terms. Terms is an option. This is where we can actually have 3 different feed rates on this tool that's controlled by a G code. Okay. Now let's go down to life. Now notice life in the corner where it says mode, we get counts. We could change that to hours and minutes by putting a 1 here.
So we go back and put a 1 and hit enter, and then life is measured in time or hours, minutes, and seconds, right?
Yes, it is. Now let's go over to where it says warn. And let's kind of straighten these numbers out a little bit, Tim. Let's put 30 here.
So 30 minutes
Right.
for a warning,
Right.
and then we'll clear out that 0, or that 30 rather.
Okay. So notice that if you look at the warning, we got 30 minutes where we're going to get warned at. But the limit is set at 36 because our percentage is 20% over our 30 minutes. So that's where we get it. So what happened is when we go to now, okay, and we put 30 minutes there, which we reach the warning time, the tool is over with, life is over with, but we still got another 6 minutes left on that particular tool. So that means we could wait until it gets delivered back to the magazine and do maintenance on that thing. Like the whole part, we don't want to stop this system from running. We want to get tools before they really wear out. So let's go and put 36 there, Tim.
So we go to now and put in 36. Again, enter.
So now 36 is the maximum time that tool will run. So now it's not available. So if in this case, if we had a redundant tool, it would go use a redundant tool. If we don't have a redundant tool, our system stops. Our machine will not pick that tool up.
Okay. And then we've got this other option here, Keith. What is this where he says, is it a low speed change?
Right. That's a low speed ATC change. That means most of the time what I use this for is like if I got a probe and I don't want the probe to get tool changed too quickly into the machine because it could actually break the ceramic tip off the tool, probe. So I'll put a 1 here, 1 meaning every time I do this, do a slow tool change on this particular tool. Okay, now let's go down to the status of the tool. And we got a couple of options. We got broken, life, and adaptive control, and then we got first tool. So this actually tells you what the status of that particular tool is. So at this time, the life is over with this tool. Now, let's go down one more. And we're going to talk about adaptive control, but we're going to do a search again to see how we search through this in our data page.
So just like we had done a search before when we were at our data page, we can do a search in the detail pages to quickly pull up a different tool. So use page up to the pocket number, and I know that we have some adaptive control information on pocket number 1. So again, just put in a 1, hit search, and we'll jump straight to that detail page. Okay. So also really quickly, Keith, all this information here, this is what would be entered if we had a matrix magazine. All this would be entered as we enter the tool to the magazine, correct?
Right. So as Tim spoke, is that if we had a matrix magazine, this information will be entered at the matrix control. So if we had a long frame matrix, it would be a computer. Compact is just a little PLC that we have this information on. Hope to show this soon. So let's go back to our adaptive control again. Now, this is the base. The base is spindle load. So when we ran this particular tool, we just set this base at 10. It could be taught by the machine, but we just, for examples, we're just going to put a 10 in. So now we got a width. The width is taken at 5%. So we're looking at 5% above 10 and 5% below 10%. So that comes out to be 5 and 15%. So now we come over to high. So if it doesn't sense a spindle load, it would be down in the 5%. So we told it that we could overwrite and go up to 120% feed rate. Come down to the low, and if we had a load on it and it gets above the 15%, to try to slow it down and keep it in cut.
So just so I'm understanding this correctly, if we have a spindle load of 5%, it'll increase the feed rate to 120, which is the value we had set here as the high.
True.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, if we reach 15% spindle load, then it'll decrease our feed rate to 80%. And if we get below 80, then we get that adaptive control alarm. Is that right?
True.
Okay.
Okay. Now let's go to mass. Tool mass. Tool mass is saying that we have a 3-speed tool change on our machines. You look at the weight of the tool. So the higher the weight, the slower it would do a tool change. So we got high, low, and medium. Now let's go down to see maximum RPMs. So we can set the maximum RPM here too. We could go, limit this tool at say 5,000 RPMs, and it will never exceed that. So that kind of ended. So Tim is going to take over with our spare.
So what we're going to be looking at next is our spare tools. So for example, I see our tool information here. Our tool name is 3939. I'll say I'm curious and I want to find out if we have any spare tools. We can do a search by either a pocket number or by the tool number. So like I said, I was curious to see if we have any other 3939 tools. We'll hit enter. In this case, I see that we do have 3. So it'll give you the pocket number for each of those tools. Again, our tool number, depending on what we had searched for. And then it gives you the life. So we've got our warning, what we're currently at, and then our limit. Also give you status in case we have alarmed out due to adaptive control, if it's reached the end of its life, or if it's broken. So then we can also quickly add a spare tool, right, Keith?
Yes, we can. So if we want to add a spare tool, we go to end. Okay, and then what we want to do is search for a different pocket. Let's go to pocket 4.
Go to pocket 4. Okay, so we again just enter in 4 and hit search.
Okay, so pocket 4, let's go to the tool number or tool name and put that same number in.
So that same number was 3939. Enter.
Yes. And put some kind of serial number. Let's give it 1004. We're going to serialize the pocket.
So again, that serial number has to be unique to that individual tool.
Okay. Now, let's see.
Okay, so we'll go back and we'll do a spare tool search again. And we'll use that same tool number. Well, actually, we'll show you a different way. We'll use the pocket number. So again, as an example, we just entered that information for pocket number 4. So you just enter the 4 and enter. And again, pulls up the same information. We now have 4 of those spare tools. Okay, the next thing we wanted to look at were our parameters. So Keith is going to talk you through that.
So let's go to end and let's go to arrow.
Oop.
Arrow. And let's go back to tools.
We'll go back to tools, sorry.
Okay, parameters. Okay, here's the parameters. We had where we specify what H numbers are used. So we can specify different numbers, but we chose 1, 2, and 3 because that's the first 3 on our list. Let's go down to adaptive control. This is another way we could tweak our adaptive control to a more finer pitch here. And let's go down to unit. And our units is set for inchometric. This is how we change how we call up our tool life management. We're either going to run inchometric. Rest of these are options. So let's go to transfer. So if we had a matrix magazine, all this information is going to be in our OP supporter. And we could possibly have over 300 tools in our matrix magazine. So if we want never to lose this data, we could always save it to our NC directory by going to this screen and we can hit save. Generates 4 programs that's going to be saved into our NC directory. So we can retrieve that again and just do load next time. And it'll load this information back up into our OP support.
So this really just serves as a tool backup, correct?
Right.
And we can save that either to the NC on the machine, or we can save it to the cell controller itself.
Right.
And then we're able to upload it later on if need be, should you lose that information for whatever reason. Now, Keith, how often do you recommend that people go through and save their data here?
Well, I would save it at least twice a month.
Twice a month? Okay.
Okay. Now we're going to do one more function. So we go in, let's end, and let's go out of this. Now we're going to go to manual transfer. Now we talked about having more than one machine on the cell controller. So say for instance I do have more than one machine. And I'm sitting at this machine debugging the program, trying it out. Once I make my changes to the program, I never want to lose that information. Because a lot of times when we deliver another pallet to it, it overwrites the program that's I just worked on. So before we leave the machine, we want to always save that program back to the cell controller. And Tim is going to show you this.
So how we would do that, again, you pull up this manual transfer screen, and we want to make sure that we hit upload. Okay. So what we would be looking at, we always want to look at the program
that we
were working on first. So we go to our O number here, and we'll put in 1,000. And that'll pull up what we had just been looking at. Okay. So we see our program here. And again, if we've been updating or debugging it, all the information is there. And then we can name the part, as Keith had been saying. So you're either able to name it as the same
And overwrite
it, or you create a new name so you're able to find that and differentiate the two. So we'll name that as something else here. We'll do webinar live chase -1 and hit enter. And then if everything looks correct here, we can hit execute. And that'll send this information directly to our cell controller. So we can close out and pull up our NC control here. And if you remember back to our previous webinar, we can do a quick search. So these are all the part numbers that we have that start with webinar. And the one that I had just sent to the cell controller is webinar live chase.
Now, as you can see, it tells us when did we send it, what time we did send it back to our cell controller.
So then if we had done transmitted date, that's when we would send the information from the cell controller to a machine, correct?
Sure, correct.
Okay. All right, so that's all we have for you today with our OP supporter. All right, we covered going through our tool management software, again, which is OP supporter. We didn't necessarily talk about other functions on the OP supporter itself, since some of those are for our standalone machine. But we did look at what applies to us in the FMS world. We also talked about RGV operation, which mostly includes manually moving the RGV about the cell so we can get in and do maintenance, whether it to be to clean or to fix different things, whatever you would need. So again,
so always remember, we always want to run the system in auto cycle. We try not to do no manual moves if possible.
If possible, but again, sometimes we might need to get in for maintenance, whatever we have.
Right.
Okay. So that does conclude our fourth FMS webinar. I know that was a lot of information that we did throw at you in a quick amount of time. So we thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. We do have some time left, so if you do have questions, please get those to us using the chat or question function on your webinar viewer now. So the first question we've got here is, do I need an M code in my program to use the first tool function?
Yes, you do. It's an M75, and I think we're going to put an example on the web for you guys to look at how we should format our program.
Okay. And again, if you open up your webinar viewer, you can look at questions, and then we can go through those. We can pull up our cell controller again for you, so if you had a question about a specific part in OP Supporter or about the buffer stands or about the RGV, we can go through that and show that to you as well. So I'll give you just another minute or so to get any questions into us, but if that's all we do have, you can always send in a question that you think of later by contacting us at 800-257-2985 or by sending us an email to service@toyota.com. We do have another question here, and it's wondering about the maintenance on the RGV. Says our system is about 2 years old and we had to adjust the loading height at both the load stations and at the machine. How often should the alignment of the system be checked, and who should it be checked by?
Well, you could check it through your maintenance department, but I really recommend that you do contact Toyota for at least a once a year complete checkup of the whole system. That's when we look at your rails and make sure you get enough grease. But, you know, it depends on how much you use it. If you run around the clock, you want to do it a little more often.
Okay, so essentially we recommend that you do it just about once a year, but if you are using it extensively, then it might be necessary to do that a little bit more frequently. Okay, another question we had, if you use the Z-axis in jog mode on the RGV, you can't use the Y-axis. So is there a way to lift the pallet up to take it onto the RGV in jog mode, or do you have to use manual transfer to do that?
Well, in that case, you always want to use a two front or a manual transfer to get that there.
So again, manual transfer or to and from,
Right.
we don't recommend that you do it with the jog, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then we had another question about adaptive control. They're curious about where they can find more information about that, or should we go through and show them some more information?
Well,
Live.
you can get more information by either contacting us here at Toyota, because, you know, most of the systems we have do have adaptive control on it. It's just how we utilize it. So we can send information or try to put it on the web for you.
Okay.
Or contact us.
Yeah, so if you have a specific question, go ahead and send it into either service, or you can contact us directly, and then we'll get that information to you. We don't have it in any manuals, Keith?
Yeah, we do have a manual, so I will look for it and try to put it on the web.
Okay, we'll find that manual for you guys, and then we can get that out to you. So if we don't have any further questions, that is all we do have for you today. And as we said before, if you do think of anything else in the meantime, you can send us an email or give us a call. We're always happy to help. Please be looking forward to an email invitation from us inviting you to our 5th series in the webinar. This is actually going to serve as our finale and will be the last webinar we have that's covering the FMS at this time. So I'll serve as a wrap-up and talk about any other topics that we haven't discussed up till now. And if you do have questions, we can focus on those at that time as well. We've got this tentatively scheduled for next year in January, so be on the lookout for an invitation for that so you can register and join us at the next time. Again, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session.